Hello and welcome. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. European leaders are set to join Volodymyr Zelensky in his much-anticipated meeting with US President Donald Trump. They are seeking to shore up the Ukrainian president's position as his US counterparts presses Kyiv to accept a quick peace deal to end Europe's deadliest war in 80 years. Well, this comes as China has urged all parties taking part in Washington's Ukraine peace deal to work towards a deal as soon as possible. Beijing said a lasting agreement must be acceptable to all sides and based on dialogue and not conflict. The number of people killed in an overnight Russian attack on Kharkiv has risen to 7, this according to its local governor. Kharkiv Mayor Tereshkov said that 5 Russian drones hit the building from different sides at around 5 a.m. local time. Well, this comes as Russia fires a ballistic missile into a residential area of Kharkiv, injuring at least 11 people, including a 13-year-old boy. The blast has shattered windows, damaged apartments and forced evacuations as rescuers aid residents. Thousands joined nationwide protests demanding a deal with Hamas to free hostages and end the war, blocking roads between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Police detain 38 demonstrators as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns such calls harden Hamas's position. Early results show centrist Senator Rodrigo Paz leading Bolivia's presidential race with around 32% of the vote, followed by conservative former president Jorge Tuto Corriga with 27. The two now head to a runoff, ending 2 decades of leftist rule. Well, we start this hour as China called for all parties involved in peace talks in Washington to reach an agreement as soon as possible to end Russia's war in Ukraine. US President Donald Trump is hosting Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who will meet the US President one-on-one before joined by European leaders, including EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen. China reiterated its support for all efforts towards a peaceful settlement of the Ukraine crisis. The Foreign Ministry said it welcomes continued contact between the US and Russia, including promises of robust security guarantees for Ukraine as part of the political process to end the conflict. Let's listen in to what Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning has said.
我们期待所有的当事方和利益攸关方都能适时参与到和谈进程中，尽早达成一个公平、持久、有约束力，并且能够为各当事方接受的和平协议。
Well, joining us to discuss all of these developments, these comments from China, but also the ramification of these talks in Washington is Professor Georgi Toleraya, an international affairs expert who's joining us live from Moscow in Russia. Professor Toleraya, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Let's first get your reaction on these comments from China, urging all parties involved to try and get a deal done as quickly as possible. Of course, there have been accusations of China assisting Russia in its war against Ukraine. Do you think that China are neutral in this conflict?
Chinese are trying to be neutral, and of course they support the cause of Russia because it just fits into the vision of the world and the concept of the global developments. They are doing so not out of love for Russia, but out of their own national interests. So we are thankful to the Chinese for well wishes, for this good wishes, for the peace process. But the peace process is at very start. It can be disrupted any moment. And much will depend, of course, on today's evening meeting in Washington between President Trump and Zelensky and the support group from Europe. It's hard to predict how it will go. I'm personally not very optimistic.
Yes, Professor Tolerai, let's build on that lack of optimism that you're having. Why do you think that this meeting is not necessarily going to provide pivotal progress on this peace deal? Do you think it's because Donald Trump has sided with Vladimir Putin?
I don't think that because Donald Trump to have taken some sides. I think the situation is much more clear now. President Putin made some proposals, peace proposals, to President Trump in Alaska, and they of course reflect Russian national interest and Russian understanding of the situation. But the end of these suggestions is peace deal. While what we might hear today in Washington from Zelensky and the European leaders is war, continuing the war. So these two positions are very hard to find some compromise between them, and we don't know yet what was the exact contents of President Putin's proposals, but I think that the Zelensky and European leaders are very confrontational to them from the start, even before listening to them. So that is why the lack of optimism on my part, because I really doubt if President Trump have vigor and power enough to persuade Zelensky and European leaders.
Yes, Professor Tolerai, before we move on to a related development, of course, Ukraine have been staunch in their position, saying they do not want to cede land that has been taken by Russia. Of course, around 20% of Ukraine is now under Russian control. Do you think this will have to be changed, that stance, in order to see a peace deal anytime soon?
We need to take into account the real situation on the ground. Russia have accepted the territories which is speaking about by the vote of its citizens, so it's going to keep them. And this is a reality, regardless of there will be deal or no deal, or will the war continue. Ukrainian side desire is unrealistic, so we should start from here.
Professor Tolerai, please do stay with us, because we're now going to look at one of those German leaders who is going to be present at these talks, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who has left for Washington to join these European leaders and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky for talks with President Donald Trump. Trump is pressing Ukraine for a quick peace deal after his summits with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. Meanwhile, German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul, speaking in Tokyo, called for increased pressure on Russia and more aid for Ukraine, stressing firm security guarantees so Kyiv can defend itself even after a ceasefire or peace agreement. Let's now listen to the German Foreign Minister.
Es ist gut und wichtig, dass Präsident Trump es sich zum Ziel gemacht hat, das Sterben in der Ukraine zu beenden. Das Treffen in Alaska hat verdeutlicht, für einen gerechten und dauerhaften Frieden muss Moskau sich endlich bewegen. Bis das nicht passiert, muss der Druck auf Russland erhöht werden, auch mit verstärkten Ukraine-Hilfen. Dass auch Japan die Ukraine bislang mit 12 Milliarden Dollar unterstützt hat und Sanktionen gegen Russland durchsetzt, dafür bin ich sehr dankbar.
Well, Professor Tolerai, thank you ever so much for staying with us. Of course, security guarantees, if there is a ceasefire or at least a truce or end to the war, is something that Europe are very keen on, also Ukraine. And Donald Trump has been positive. Why do you think that Germany is repeating this rhetoric when Trump has confirmed himself that there will be security guarantees for Ukraine?
I'm thinking why nobody speaks about security guarantees for Russia as a outcome of this peace process. What are the security guarantees for Russia from invasion or psychological war or terrorism or economic warfare like the sanctions on the part of European countries, on the NATO countries? Are there any guarantees that Russia should demand as a result of the peace deal? I'm more concerned with that, actually, when the security guarantees to Ukraine. One thing is clear to me: Ukraine should be a neutral state and shouldn't be a part of NATO. What other guarantees they want, that's their business.
Yes, and Professor Toleraya, of course, that's something Donald Trump has also repeated, that NATO membership for Ukraine is not a possibility. Of course, just building on your point on security guarantees for Russia, European leaders will say that Russia were the instigator in this. We have heard that rhetoric multiple times. But let's look at the European unity that we have seen amongst almost all of the EU bloc nations, also the United Kingdom and the coalition of the willing as well. Do you think that they have been successful in their unity in the face of sanctions against Russia that, to put it bluntly, haven't really been that effective?
Well, of course, the sanctions hurt, and the desire of European leaders in different degree to instigate as much damage to Russia as possible is regrettable, and it's not welcome, and it won't be tolerated. But I think that sooner or later, the European nations will elect the leaders who will be more realistic and will understand that they cannot deliver strategic defeat to Russia, and we should try to learn to live together in a more pragmatic and realistic way.
Yes, Professor Toleraya, if you do stay with us once again, we have another development, this time away from diplomacy and into Ukraine and the battlefields as well. This comes as a Russian drone attack on Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, has killed 7 people overnight, including a toddler and a 16-year-old boy. 20 more, among them 6 children, were wounded, according to local officials. Officials say that Russia launched 140 drones across Ukraine, the largest single-night barrage in weeks. The Air Force reported that 88 drones were shot down, but strikes still hit 25 locations in 6 regions. Kharkiv, just 30 kilometres from the Russian border, has been under relentless bombardment since the war began. Sunday's separate missile strike shattered 1,000 windows in Kharkiv's residential blocks, forcing evacuations. Overnight missiles also struck Zaporizhia, injuring 17 people, while attacks in Odessa set fire to fuel facilities. Damage was also reported in Sumy, where 2 were injured. Let's now listen to Amil Omerov, who is the head of the Kharkiv Regional Prosecutor's Office.
Сьогодні близько 5-ї ранку місто прокинулося від чергових російських атак. Під ударами опинився індустріальний район міста Харкова. Було близько 5 влучань по багатоквартирному житловому будинку. За попередніми даними, це БПЛА типу Герань-2. На жаль, маємо інформацію вже на даний час про більше ніж 19 постраждалих, серед яких і діти, а також, на жаль, маємо і 3 загиблих, серед них 2-річна дитина. Профільні служби працюють на місці, йде розбір завалів, тому, на жаль, ця цифра щодо постраждалих та загиблих, на жаль, буде динамічна, і я вважаю, що їх число буде збільшуватися.
Well, we move on now, and the chairman of the Adani Group, Gautam Adani, will be delivering a speech on the occasion of the 75th Foundation Day of IIT Kharagpur in India today. Let's have a listen.
That cry of Vande Mataram was more than slogan. It was a promise sealed in blood and sacrifice, a promise of India's unbreakable resolve, and a promise beyond those that freedom would live on who gave their beyond those, and it is about who gave their lives for freedom. And it is about this meaning of freedom, my dear friends, that I wanted to talk to you today. 1947, my dear friends, in 1947, we broke the chains of our land. Yet in the 21st century, our nation can be independent and still be bound by dependence. Just 3 days ago, we marked our 79th Independence Day, and it is clear we stand. The world is moving at a major inflection point. The world is moving from a conventional war to technology-driven wars of power, and our ability to prepare will decide our future. That we have to fight today, the wars that we have to fight today, therefore, are often invisible. They are fought and not in our server farms and not in trenches. The weapons are algorithms, not guns. The empires are not built on land, they are built in data centers. The armies are botnets and not battalions. And here is the uncomfortable truth. In terms of technology dependence, 90% of our semiconductors are imported. One disruption or sanction can freeze our digital economy. In the case of energy vulnerability, 85% of our oil, we import 85% of our oil growth. A single geopolitical incident can restrict our growth. Borders, when our data crosses India's border material, every bit of this data becomes raw material for foreign algorithms, create foreign wealth, foreign dominance, and strengthens foreign dominance. And in the case of military dependence, many of our critical systems are imported, bringing our national security to the political will and supply chains of other nations. We must now fight for. This is the freedom we must now fight for. The freedom of self-reliance, the freedom of Atmanirbharta, if we are to be truly free. Here in the Ijli jail, 80 years ago, here in the Ijli jail for young men and women fought for the right to govern our land. That same fight continues, only the weapons have changed. Student here, and this is what I want every student here to take back. You are the next generation of freedom fighters. Software code, your innovations, your software code and your ideas are today's weapons. You will decide whether India takes command of its destiny.
Let's move on now as Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi arrives in New Delhi today for a two-day visit. He will hold talks with External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar this evening before meeting National Security Advisor Ajit Doval tomorrow for the 24th round of border talks. On Tuesday, he is also scheduled to call on Prime Minister Narendra Modi ahead of the PM's visit to China for the SCO summit later this month. The visit comes as India explores a possible relaxation of restrictions on Chinese investments in non-sensitive sectors such as renewables and manufacturing, while maintaining curbs on defence and telecom. Moreover, officials have stressed that Press Note 3, which mandates approval for all border country investments, will remain in place. This trip also takes place against the backdrop of strained India-US relations after President Trump doubled tariffs on Indian goods and penalised New Delhi for Russian oil purchases. For Beijing, Wang Yi's visit is aimed at projecting stability in ties, even as both sides remain locked in a long-running border dispute. Well, joining us to discuss these relations and this visit from Wang Yi is William Yang, a China analyst who's joining us live from Taipei. William, thank you ever so much for joining us. What is the significance of this state visit taking place today?
Well, I think the timing of this visit comes amid, like you said, the ongoing straining of the relations between New Delhi and Washington. And I think this reflects China's willingness to actually reach out to New Delhi with a very high level of official that is going to meet with not only his counterparts, but also the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I think this is Beijing reciprocating the New Delhi's earlier signals and also willingness to try to amend some of the strained relations over the last few years. And I think we are seeing China seeing an opportunity and using Wang Yi's trip to send a goodwill signal, but at the same time, I think testing the real ability for both countries to actually try to amend and improve relations. I think this is going to be a very important trip, not only ahead of the PM's trip to China next month, but also at the same time, I think it is going to open up more opportunities in channels for bilateral negotiations and discussions going forward.
Yes, and William, of course, there are strengthening ties through these meetings, and as you said, that unity that is being questioned but also potentially strengthened, that is there. But there also are border tensions, of course, long running. Do you think this is an opportunity to finally put those tensions to bed, or is this more diplomatic? And do you think there do need to be more discussions in order for this relationship between India and China to continue to develop past potentially just these tariffs on the purchases of Russian oil?
Yeah, I think this is still pretty much a diplomatic level kind of engagement because it's being conducted and carried out by the foreign minister. I think both sides still have quite some reservation against how much they can actually move forward with the goal of deepening bilateral relationships, because I think fundamentally there are still conflicting factors and areas in their interests in the region, especially. I think despite the efforts over the last few years to really try to resolve the long-running border disputes that started in 2020, and we have seen quite a lot of progress on that through the multiple rounds of the discussions and negotiations. And now this one is going to be conducted at the highest level so far, I believe, between China and India, but which I think reflects, again, the improvement that we've seen. But at the same time, I think both sides are wary of the other side's ability to really try to undermine their longstanding interests. And there are still other regional issues that I think remain the friction points for them, including China's expanding influence in the Indian Ocean region, which I think New Delhi really has been very wary and concerned about China's ability to improve relations with its allies in the region, and how much that's actually going to undermine India's, I think, interest. And so I think right now they're trying to take very careful steps moving forward,
Yes.
trying to address some of the issues that are easier to resolve because they've spent a lot more time. And then I think test the waters on all the other fronts as they move forward.
Well, William Yang, thank you ever so much for your insight there. Of course, we will continue to monitor Wang Yi's visit ahead of Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India's trip to the SCO. Let's move now, though, to the Middle East. And police in Tel Aviv say that all roads have been reopened just after midnight following massive demonstrations calling for a hostage deal and an end to the war in Gaza. 6 people were arrested after blocking the Ayalon highway and clashing with police. Earlier this on Sunday evening, tens of thousands gathered in Hostage Square in one of the largest rallies since the war began. Organisers claimed that about 500,000 people joined. The police did not confirm that number. The crowd there demanded the release of hostages and an end to the war in Gaza. We'll now have a listen to what some protesters have had to say.
We're here to make it very clear to the Israeli government that this is probably the last minute we have to save the hostages that are being held in the Hamas tunnels for almost 700 days, which is absolutely preposterous. And to say there's absolutely no alternative but a whole deal, one single deal that returns all of the hostages and put a stop to the war in Gaza.
Every day in the past 681 days we've been hoping for this nightmare to stop. I truly believe that all hostages should be home yesterday, but if not, then today. And we are hoping and praying that our government will hear us and listen to us, because I think it's a majority, a very clear majority of the Israeli people think that the war should stop.
Well, these protests capped a nationwide strike on Sunday with roads blocked across Israel and more than 30 demonstrators detained. Responding to this, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has criticised the movement, saying it strengthens Hamas. Meanwhile, the opposition leaders have blamed the government for failing hostage families. Let's now listen to what the Israeli opposition chief has had to say.
משביתים היום את המדינה מפני שהחטופים שלנו בעזה הם לא נתינים שמותר לממשלה להקריב בשביל המאמץ המלחמתי. הם אזרחים שהממשלה חייבת להחזיר הביתה למשפחות שלהם. לא יעצרו אותנו, לא יתישו אותנו, לא יעיפו אותנו, אנחנו נמשיך להילחם עד שהחטופים יחזרו הביתה, תהיה עסקה, תיפסק.
The Israel-Gaza war in its 22nd month has left more than 61,000 people dead in Gaza, that according to the territory's health ministry. Well, joining us to discuss these protests and of course the wider ramifications of the war in Gaza, Peter Baum, a foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz, who joins us live from London. Peter, can I just get your first reactions to these widespread protests in Israel? What does that say about public perception on the war in Gaza?
Yes, good day to you all and to your viewers and listeners. I've been in touch all morning with protesters and people close to the government in Israel, and I think this is actually a tipping point. Undoubtedly, up until a couple of months ago, the war in Gaza, though unpopular, did have majority support within the population. That over the last few weeks has changed dramatically. And although I still believe there is a slight majority in favour in Israeli society of what the government are doing and their conduct of the war, the movement to end the war and to release the hostages is growing day by day and is probably on an unstoppable upward trajectory. This could well be the issue, excuse me, on which the government could actually fall. The increasing hostility towards the Netanyahu government within Israel, a functioning democracy, and the protests that we've seen over the weekend gives the wider public an indication of what's going on within Israeli society. I doubt if these protests will stop. I have every reason to believe they will increase. And it could be that Netanyahu and his government, in order to stay in power, will have to perhaps rethink their way forward in which they are conducting the war. So I do believe if the protests grow, and I think they will, this could be the issue on which the Netanyahu government may either have to change policy completely or call an election.
Yes, Peter, building on that, of course, we've seen Benjamin Netanyahu continuing with his offensives and planned expansions. Of course, he's been staunch in saying this is the best way to get the return of hostages, despite there being calls from ex-officials, military, intelligence, also senior officials within Israel who have said that an expansion is not going to help in returning the hostages. Do you actually believe that he will change path, or is this a turning point potentially more politically for Israel?
I think he will have to change path if the protests continue and increase. Let's be honest here. Hamas know the only bargaining chip they have at the moment are the hostages. But they also know that if Netanyahu continues with his policy to completely destroy their military capability, they may have no alternative, as they see it, but to kill the hostages, and that would be disastrous for every member of Israeli society. So this is a very delicate balancing game. I cannot believe, given the amount of protests and the number of people in senior positions who are coming out against Netanyahu, that he will have to do anything other than but to change course with his military actions and perhaps decide once and for all that the hostages above all need to be released and saved. And military action, I'm afraid, won't do it. It hasn't worked for a couple of years. It's not going to work in the next couple of months, I don't believe.
Well, Peter, thank you ever so much for those opinions and insights there. I wish we had longer to speak on this topic, but of course so much to continue monitoring within Israel, geopolitically, and also within Gaza, and we will continue to do that here on NewsX World. Let's now move on though. A centrist Senator, Rodrigo Paz, led Bolivia's presidential election according to early official results, with the ruling movement for socialism headed for its worst defeat in a generation. Paz of the Christian Democratic Party secured 32.18% of the vote, while Eduardo del Castillo of MAS received only 3.16%, that according to initial results released by the Electoral Tribunal on Sunday night. Let's now hear what Rodrigo Paz has had to say.
Cada vez generar un proyecto político en Bolivia era más complicado. Tenemos que luchar para que las grandes mayorías como hoy día aquí reunidas en este prado, en esta La Paz, que debo agradecer profundamente por su cariño, su cobijo, porque la victoria fue contundente en La Paz. Quiero agradecer.
Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will be back shortly with more of the latest breaking news from across the world.